On today's episode of Star Wars Factions Compared, we examine artillery. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Star Wars Factions Compared. Today we will be looking at the artillery of the Galactic Empire, Republic, Rebel Alliance, and Confederacy of Independent Systems. We'll try to determine which one is best. Today's episode is sponsored by the EckhartsLadder Discord. If you want to vote on video ideas, talk Star Wars, Halo, Warhammer, and science fiction, or you just want to interact with me and the rest of the community, make sure to join at discord.gg/EckhartsLadder. It's super easy, even if you've never joined Discord before. Alright, so on to the comparison. We'll be looking at 4 pieces of artillery, which only really have one thing in common. They're mobile. Otherwise, they're all very, very different. We'll start with the Empire and one of the strangest vehicles in Star Wars history, the ATIC. I bring this walker up as much as I possibly can, just because I think it's kind of interesting. The ATIC, or the All-Terrain Ion Cannon, also has an interesting real-world history. It was first created as part of a proposed toy line by Kenner. That line, which would have been the first post-Endor expanded universe content, was not, however, approved or licensed by Lucasfilm, and the toys never were sold. However, nearly 20 years later, with the new Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology, the ATIC was officially brought into canon. In 2008, with the complete Star Wars encyclopedia, it was revealed that the walker was basically the exact same as the proposed Kenner toy. Unfortunately, there have never been any official images of the ATIC, so the only thing we have to go off of is the Kenner prototype. The ATIC is essentially an all-terrain armored transport, an AT-AT, with an ion cannon on its back. With that, it maintains all the positive and negative aspects of the famous walker, including heavy armor but a relatively slow speed, a lack of maneuverability but powerful main weapons, a high vantage point, etc, etc. Although the main weapons of the AT-AT obviously are very powerful and can be effective over long ranges, as we saw at the Battle of Hoth, the main artillery weapon for the walker is obviously the large ion cannon. When compared to the other artillery pieces on this list, I'd say that this is probably a mid-tier weapon when looking at actual power. However, it's kind of in a weird spot. It doesn't have the tonnage that a dedicated artillery piece would, but it doesn't have the mobility of something like a light artillery piece or a smaller walker. I'm really not sure if attaching an ion cannon to the back of an AT-AT really makes a whole lot of sense. I will say though, besides for a little extra vulnerability, it doesn't seem like the AT-AT is actually made any worse by the addition of the cannon, and I think perhaps it could serve fairly well in an anti-aircraft role, but as an actual artillery piece, I think it leaves some things to be desired. Let's now move to our next faction, the Galactic Republic. The Grand Army of the Republic actually used many artillery pieces. Arguably the AT-AP, the AT-TE, and the UT-AT all are in part, if not primarily, artillery walkers. Those vehicles, along with the one I'll be talking about here, make up a well-rounded and effective military. I think it's clear that overall and generally, the Republic has the best artillery of any of the 4 factions. However, does that excellence translate into the individual piece we'll be considering here? Let's find out. For the Republic, I've decided to go with the self-propelled heavy artillery, the SPHA. The SPHA was a slow, heavy, extremely powerful walker first introduced during the Clone Wars. The walker can really be separated into 2 parts, the chassis, including the legs, and the main weapon. The main weapon on the SPHA could actually be swapped out fairly easily, even during battle. The most famous model that we're familiar with is the SPHA-T, which uses a heavy turbo laser, but there were also concussion missile models, mass driver models, ion cannons, and I'm sure more. There were some difficulties associated with the SPHA, primarily around its size. It was very large and not really mobile. It was even hard to get it into battle in the first place, requiring dedicated landing craft. Once landed, it was also fairly slow and pretty unwieldy. However, it was extraordinarily powerful, not only having variable weapon outputs, but also anti-personnel weapons protected up close, heavy armor, and a regiment of soldiers that stayed with the artillery at all times. This meant that it was capable of causing destruction from far away, and even if you could approach the SPHA, it was very difficult to destroy. The weapons are so powerful that several SPHAs were installed within the hangars of Venator-class Star Destroyers. They were capable of destroying even Munificent-class frigates, so that's a lot of firepower. I've heard arguments that the SPHA can't arc its shots to hit targets out of sight, but I'm not sure if I necessarily believe that. We see that later walker models, including the successor SPHA SPMA are able to do so, so I see no reason why the SPHA couldn't, with some sort of different power settings or a different main weapon. Next we have the Confederacy of Independent Systems and their Defoilator Deployment Tank, cheekily enough known as the DDT. The DDT is another unique artillery piece. It's a modified armored assault transport tank with a special cannon on the top. This cannon fires the defoiler, a weapon which kills organic beings but does not seem to affect either technology or droids. A weapon of this type makes a lot of sense for the Confederacy. It allows them to shell their own positions without having to worry about friendly fire. However, let's examine the tank itself on its merits. For one, the defoiler does seem to have a very large area of effect. We see in Season 1, Episode 14 of the Clone Wars that a single shot covers a very large area, causing almost this wildfire effect. Ahsoka also notices that anybody caught in this fire ends up dying. That includes clones with full body protection, so the actual ordnance itself is very powerful. There are, however, some drawbacks. The DDT is very slow firing. Each shot has to be manually loaded and then takes a second to actually fire through the tube. Because the loading is again manual, the vehicle requires 2 loaders in order to handle the ammunition. The weapon and the tank are also not very durable. We see Anakin destroy the entire thing with just a single run through of his lightsaber. Finally, while the AAT, which is the base of the vehicle, is decent, it's nothing super impressive. It does have anti-personnel lasers, but not much else in the way of defense. I think the DDT would be much more effective if it was a large, well-armored vehicle with an automatic firing system. It's hard to say whether the fact that this weapon can only affect organics is a positive or a negative. Obviously, if fighting a droid army, this will be near useless. However, if you're just fighting a standard army, although you technically can't destroy any heavy vehicles, you can still kill the pilots and the operators, which in some ways is even better as you can capture it yourself. It is worth noting, however, that the blast can be stopped by energy shields, which is a tactical disadvantage. Finally, we have the Rebel Alliance. As always, the Alliance has the bare minimum when it comes to heavy vehicles, so it's no surprise that they go for a lightweight, quick-firing artillery piece. I'm talking specifically about the Mobile Proton Torpedo Launcher, which appears in Star Wars Empire at War, which, by the way, I'm playing on my second channel. The MPTL is basically the epitome of Rebel technology. It's meant for hit-and-run tactics, but can't really take any direct fire itself. It's fast, it has a relatively short range, especially without additional spotter units. It has 0 anti-personnel weapons and is very susceptible to even light blaster fire. I think it's fairly clear the kind of vehicle that you're getting here. First of all, the MPTL cannot operate on its own. To be truly effective, it needs both protection and its dedicated spotter droids. It's also not going to be inflicting a ton of damage and will never really be on the front lines. It's a fine vehicle. I mean, there's not really a whole lot else to say besides that. With those 4 vehicles out of the way, let's now take a second to rank them from worst to best. Coming in 4th spot is the ATIC. Although we don't know much about the Walker, it's my opinion that it would likely have the worst of both worlds. An AT-AT isn't really a large enough platform to have a devastating artillery piece, however it's not really small and fast enough to operate as some sort of quick hitting artillery, kind of like the Rebel vehicle. I also think generally the AT-AT is flawed as a Walker and is more a tool of intimidation rather than an effective war machine. Coming in at number 3 is the MPTL-2A. This is a vehicle which almost paradoxically is really meant for hit and run tactics, but relies on a fairly substantial support structure. Also, despite its speed, it still needs to actually stop and use grips to fire its weapon. I think the MPTL would be much better if it was heavier, more well armed, and had more in the way of weaponry, since it's not going to be operating on its own anyway. That being said, I do admit that it does have its uses and it's really not a bad vehicle. Coming in at number 2 is the CIS and their DDT. I like the DDT. It's a very specialized weapon, it has a large area of effect, and it was very well designed by the Confederacy of Independent Systems. That being said, I don't like the manual firing mechanism. I wish it was a bit sturdier, maybe built on a different base rather than the AAT, and it would also be nice if it had 2 firing modes, one for the standard anti-organic shells and a second one with just high-powered explosives, although I guess that's more or less a standard tank. Finally, at number 1, we have the SPHA. Yes, it's unwieldy, it's hard to get to the battlefield, and it's slow. However, when actually there in the fight, it's extremely versatile, powerful, and hard to destroy. It can support itself, but when in a small task force, is incredibly deadly. I honestly think the Republic did artillery right. I could have chosen this vehicle or several others, and I think they would have all got the number 1 spot. That, however, is just my opinion. What did you think? Let me know down in the comment section, as well as any future video ideas you'd like to see get made. Also take a second and vote in the upper right hand corner. Let me know which artillery piece you think is the best. Anyway guys, until next time, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the force be with you.